Ambassador Park Min-ho adjusted his collar one final time as the massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep, resonating hum.
Oh.
The sound echoed through corridors that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations for over 10,000 years. His polished black boots clicked against the crystalline floor as he walked forward, each step measured and deliberate. The chamber itself was a marvel that never failed to impress even the most seasoned diplomats. Towering spires of living crystal reached toward a domed ceiling that displayed real-time images of distant galaxies, their light casting dancing shadows across the assembled delegates. The air thrummed with barely contained energy from the various life support systems needed to accommodate hundreds of different species. Min-ho's uniform, simple by galactic standards, bore only the blue and white emblem of the Terran Federation, a design that had caused heated debates among alien anthropologists, who couldn't understand why humans chose such basic colors when the galaxy offered millions of hues their eyes couldn't even perceive. As he reached the central speaking platform, the cacophony of alien communication washed over him like a tide. The insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in rapid-fire conversations that sounded like typewriters having seizures. The gaseous nebuloids pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that painted the nearby walls in shifting rainbows of meaning. Somewhere in the upper galleries, the crystal-singing harmonites produced notes that made his teeth ache. But it was the silence that followed his arrival that truly commanded attention. One by one, conversations died as hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and consciousness probes focused on the lone human standing at the center of their ancient hall. Honored members of the council, Min-ho began, his voice steady despite the weight of knowing that his next words might determine the fate of his entire species. The universal translators, marvels of technology that had taken the combined efforts of 50 civilizations to perfect, carried his words to every corner of the vast chamber in forms that each species could comprehend. Humanity comes before you, not as conquerors, but as neighbors, seeking peaceful coexistence. The reaction was immediate and predictable. A wave of chittering, humming, and electromagnetic pulses swept through the assembly. Min-ho had expected this. His diplomatic training had prepared him for the galaxy's general opinion of his species, supreme. War Chief Krextile dominated the central dais like a living mountain. His species, the hegemony, had ruled through military might for 3 millennia, and their leader embodied everything that made them feared across the galaxy. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleamed with embedded technological implants that constantly monitored battlefield conditions across his empire. His forearms, each capable of crushing steel, crossed in a gesture that every species recognized as disdain. "These mammals," he said, his voice a bass rumble that vibrated through the floor, "speak of peace while their ships prowl our borders like scavengers." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Min-ho had anticipated this too. Human exploration fleets had indeed been mapping star systems near alien territories, but always in international space, always following galactic maritime law to the Let Dr. Kim Sora stepped forward from the human delegation. As Terra's chief xenobiologist, she had spent decades studying the species now arrayed before them. Her presence here wasn't just diplomatic, it was strategic. She understood these beings in ways that pure politicians never could. "We explore because it is our nature," she said, her voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher addressing slow students. "We settle new worlds because our population grows. We ask only for the same rights granted to every species in this galaxy." The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates leaped to their feet, appendages, or hovering positions. The crystalline collectives. Representatives shattered 3 of its outer shells in agitation, filling the air with tinkling sounds like wind chimes in a hurricane. The void swimmers, beings of pure darkness given form, began emanating waves of cosmic cold that made nearby delegates shiver despite their environmental suits. Through it all, the ancient collective speaker remained motionless on its energy throne. The being was old when the first galactic civilization had discovered fire, consciousness that had watched species rise to greatness and fall to dust. Its form, a shifting mass of pure energy barely contained within a translucent crystalline shell pulsed with irritation that sent ripples through local space-time. "Rights must be earned, young species," it said, its voice somehow managing to be heard despite having no vocal cords, no mouth, no physical form capable of speech.
Ow.
"You have existed for mere moments in galactic time." The dismissal was absolute. Minho felt the weight of it, the casual arrogance of beings who measured time in geological epochs, looking down at a species that had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 centuries ago. But he also felt something else rising in his chest, something that every human recognized but few other species truly understood. Anger, cold, controlled, and infinitely dangerous. Minho raised his hand for silence. The gesture itself was almost insulting to beings who communicated through methods ranging from quantum entanglement to controlled stellar emissions. But something in his posture made the chamber gradually quiet. When he spoke again, his words carried a weight that seemed to press against every being present. "We have studied your histories," he said, each word measured and precise. "All of them. The hegemony's conquest of the spiral arm, the collective's absorption of the Sisounja's civilization, the void swimmers feeding on the bright ones, until nothing remained but empty space, where their stars once shone." A ripple of unease ran through the assembly. Humans were supposed to be young, ignorant, easily intimidated by the vast scope of galactic history. They weren't supposed to have cataloged the dark chapters that most species preferred to forget. "We know what happens when species are pushed beyond their limits," Minho continued. "Humanity has survived ice ages that turned our world into a frozen ball of death. We've endured global wars that left our continents burning and our skies dark with ash. We've overcome plagues that killed hundreds of millions, disasters that would have ended most species, invasions by our own creations that nearly destroyed us." His eyes, those peculiar human eyes with their whites showing even when calm, swept across the assembled delegates. Many found themselves looking away, unable to meet that steady gaze. "We have learned to adapt, to endure, to overcome anything the universe throws at us. We prefer to build rather than destroy. We choose creation over conquest. But if you force our hand," he paused, letting the silence stretch like a held breath, "don't make us angry. You won't like what we become." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as laughter, a cacophony of alien sounds, expressing amusement and contempt. The Zephyrian's mandible clicking reached machine gun speeds. The nebuloids pulsed with colors that translated roughly to hilarious absurdity. Even the normally stoic void swimmers rippled with what passed for mirth among their kind. Supreme War Chief Krextel's voice boomed over the noise. His forearms, gesturing in patterns that his species used before crushing particularly entertaining enemies. "Is that a threat, little mammal?" The laughter died as every being in the chamber focused on the human ambassador's response. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galactic community, either as equals to be respected or as primitives to be managed. Minho's reply was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the vast chamber with perfect clarity. "It's a warning, the only one you'll get." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chamber's environmental system seemed too quiet, as if the station itself was holding its breath. 3 days later, after heated debates that lasted through multiple day-night cycles, the Galactic Council voted. The decision was unanimous, a rarity in galactic politics that spoke to how unified the alien species were in their assessment of the human threat. Humanity had 30 solar cycles to submit to full galactic oversight or face the consequences. The message was delivered to every human world simultaneously, broadcast on frequencies that reached from the inner colonies to the frontier settlements at the galaxy's edge. It was simple, direct, and non-negotiable. Surrender your independence, accept alien governance, or be eliminated as a threat to galactic peace. What the Council didn't understand was that they had just made the greatest mistake in galactic history. They had given humanity exactly what it needed most: common enemy and a deadline. The 30-day countdown had begun, and across human space, something ancient and terrible began to stir. The first signs of trouble came not with explosions or declarations of war, but with something far more insidious: silence. Captain Lee. Dongman had been running cargo between human colonies and alien trade stations for 15 years, and he'd never seen anything like it. The Soul's Pride drifted just outside Nexus Station's docking perimeter, her holds packed with rare earth. Elements that 3 different alien civilizations desperately needed for their technology. But the massive space station, gleaming wheel of metal and crystal that had processed billions of tons of cargo for over 2 centuries, might as well have been a tomb. Access. Control. This is Captain Lee requesting docking clearance, he transmitted. For the 7th time in 2 hours, I've priority cargo for the Zephyrian Technical Consortium. The response, when it finally came, was delivered in the flat, motionless tone that universal translators used when the speaker wanted to convey absolute finality. Negative souls. Pride. Human vessels are no longer permitted to dock at this facility. Please depart immediately or face impoundment. Lee stared at the communication panel as if it had personally insulted his ancestors. Round him, his crew of 12 men and women who had worked these routes for years exchanged worried glances. "Sir," called out his navigator, Lieutenant Park Jiho, picking up similar transmissions across all frequencies. "Human ships are being turned away from every major trading hub in this sector." The captain's weathered hands gripped the armrests of his command chair. At 55, Lee had survived pirate attacks, solar flares, and engine failures that would have killed lesser crews, but this was different. This was systematic, coordinated, and terrifyingly complete. "This is economic warfare," he said into his emergency transmitter, broadcasting directly to Terran Command on a military frequency. "They're trying to starve us out." Across human space, similar scenes played out with clockwork precision. New Seoul found herself locked out of the crystalline markets. The Busan trader was escorted away from hegemony space by warships 3 times her size. The Incheon Express, carrying medical supplies to a human colony, watched helplessly as alien customs officials seized her cargo and declared it contraband. Within 72 hours, human merchant traffic had been reduced to internal routes only. Centuries of carefully built trade relationships vanished overnight like morning mist. Back on Earth, in the gleaming towers of New Geneva, where the Terran Federation's government had operated for over a century, President Cho Ha-jin stood before a holographic display that painted humanity's situation in stark, unforgiving detail. Red zones spread across the galactic map like a disease, marking areas where human ships were no longer welcome, where diplomatic missions had been expelled, where centuries-old treaties had been torn up and discarded. The president was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching 160 centimeters. But she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had clawed her way up from the slums of Old Seoul to the highest office in human space. Her dark eyes, enhanced with neural implants that allowed her to process data streams at superhuman speeds, tracked the incoming reports with growing alarm. Madam President called her aide, a young man whose nervous energy seemed to vibrate. "Through the room, we're receiving confirmation of trade embargo implementations across all sectors. Even the species we've had peaceful relations with for generations are cutting all ties." Admiral Song Jae-hain stepped forward from his position near the tactical displays. At 70, he was one of the oldest serving officers in the Terran fleet. A man whose face bore the scars of humanity's early, more violent encounters with alien species. His uniform, crisp, despite having been worn for 18 straight hours, carried ribbons from conflicts most people had forgotten. "They're testing our resolve," he reported, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent fighting impossible odds. 3 merchant vessels have gone missing in the neutral zone this week alone. No distress calls, no wreckage, just ... gone. Holographic display shifted, showing the locations where human ships had vanished. The pattern was clear to anyone with military training. These weren't random disappearances. They were precision strikes designed to send a message. "How long before civilian populations start feeling the effects?" President Cho asked. Medical supplies to the outer colonies will run short within 6 weeks, replied her economic advisor, Dr. Kim Seung-won. Food shipments to the terraforming projects will last maybe 3 months. After that, ... He didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room understood what happened to colonies that couldn't feed themselves. The test came at New Busan, a world that had never known war. The agricultural colony sat in the outer rim like a jewel, its vast farming complexes feeding 17 different human settlements across 3 star systems. 200,000 people called it home farmers, engineers, teachers, children who had never seen anything more threatening than a broken harvester. Colony. Administrator Han Sujin was reviewing crop projections when her early warning systems began screaming. The 40-year-old former engineer had spent her entire adult life turning dead worlds into gardens. But nothing had prepared her for the 12 hegemony destroyers that dropped out of hyperspace like wolves descending on sheep. Alien warships were massive, each one larger than New Busan's entire orbital defense platform, their hulls covered in the characteristic chitinous armor of hegemony military vessels, gleamed with weapon systems that could crack moons, all civilian transports. "This is Administrator Han," she broadcast on all frequencies, her voice steady, despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Begin immediate evacuation procedures. This is not a drill." The response from the hegemony fleet was swift and merciless. Energy beams, each one carrying enough power to level a city block, began raining down on the colony's population centers. Schools, hospitals, residential districts, nothing was spared. Han managed to send one last transmission before the orbital bombardment began, her words carrying across space to reach every human ear in the galaxy. "They're targeting the civilian. Centers tell Earth, tell them we did our duty." The attack lasted 6 hours. When it ended, New Busan's population of 200,000 had been reduced to scattered survivors hiding in underground shelters. Their world transformed from a garden into a smoking wasteland. The news reached Earth within hours, carried by automated probes that had escaped the destruction. In command centers across human space, something extraordinary began to happen. Transformation that alien intelligence networks would later describe as terrifyingly methodical. Industrial complexes that had spent decades producing farming, equipment, and consumer goods retooled overnight. Their assembly lines shifting to produce weapons, armor, and military hardware. Civilian shipyards, facilities that had built merchant vessels and colony ships, began welding together warships, using designs that had been classified beyond top secret. Mining operations across human space suddenly shifted their focus to strategic materials, rare metals needed for armor plating, exotic particles required for weapon systems, elements that had only theoretical military applications until now. Dr. Yoon Min-jae, head of Terra's Advanced Weapons Division, stood before a bank of monitors in a facility that officially didn't exist. The screens showed mobilization data that would have been impossible. Just days earlier, production quotas being exceeded by 400%. Civilian contractors volunteering for military service in numbers that crashed recruitment databases, research, projects that had been theoretical for decades, suddenly receiving unlimited funding and resources. Project categories Alpha through Epsilon are now active. He announced to his staff, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape the galaxy around him. Scientists and engineers who had spent their careers developing peaceful technologies began adapting their work for war. "God help us all," he whispered, though whether he was praying for humanity or their enemies, no one could say in the capital. President Cho stood before cameras that would carry her words to every human world, every station, every ship drifting. In the void between stars, her message was simple, direct, and delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who had just watched her people's children murdered from orbit. "They want to see what we're capable of," she said, her enhanced eyes reflecting the light from burning worlds. "Very well, let them learn why we never asked permission to exist." Across human space, 400 billion people began preparing for war. In factories and shipyards, in research laboratories and military academies, in the hearts and minds of every man, woman, and child who called themselves human something ancient and terrible began to stir. The galaxy had made its choice. Now it would discover why humanity had survived every attempt to destroy it. Why they had clawed their way from primitive hunters to masters of technology. Why they were the only species that had never asked for permission to exist among the stars. The countdown had begun, but it was no longer measuring time until humanity's surrender. It was counting down to the galaxy's judgment day. Fleet Admiral Bei Seung-ho stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Incheon, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched death approach in the form of 200 alien warships. The massive holographic display showed the coalition fleet as red dots spreading across space like drops of blood in water, each one representing enough firepower to level a continent. The asterisk. Incheon asterisk herself was a marvel of human engineering. 3 kilometers of deadly purpose wrapped in armor that had been forged in the fires of humanity's rage. Her hull gleamed with a strange, almost organic sheen that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. This wasn't the crude steel and ceramic composites of humanity's early space age. This was something new, something born from the ashes of New Busan and the tears of 200,000 dead colonists. Admiral called Commander Park Ji-woo from the tactical station, his voice steady despite the odds they faced. The young officer had graduated from the Naval Academy just 2 years ago, but the past 3 months had aged him a decade. Enemy fleet entering weapons range. 200 confirmed vessels, hegemony destroyers, collective energy cruisers, and what looks like a full battle group of void swimmer dreadnoughts. Admiral Bei nodded slowly. At 58, he was old enough to remember when humanity's greatest enemy had been itself. He'd served in the border wars, fought pirates in the asteroid fields, even survived the massacre at Titan Station when rogue AI had nearly wiped out human civilization. 8. But this was different. 8. This wasn't just about territory or resources or even survival. This was about proving that humanity belonged among the stars. His fleet numbered only 60 vessels, but every ship had been built or retrofitted in the 3 months since New Busan's destruction. They bore names that sang of human history and determination. The Seoul, the Tokyo, the New York, the London. Each vessel carried the hopes and dreams of an entire species, along with weapon systems that the galaxy had never seen before. A signal. "To all ships," Admiral Bei said, his voice carrying across the fleet frequency to reach every human ear in the battle group. "Remember New Busan? Remember the children who died screaming while aliens laughed at our warnings? Today we show them. The price of making humanity angry, make them pay for every meter." The response came back as a chorus of acknowledgments, each captain's voice carrying the same cold fury that had transformed human space into a war machine. These weren't the voices of conquerors or glory seekers. These were the voices of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point. Supreme War Chief Krextall commanded the coalition forces from his flagship, the Dominance, a massive vessel that had conquered star systems and broken the backs of civilizations. The four-armed alien general stood in his command center, surrounded by tactical displays that showed human positions with contemptuous precision. "Look at them," he rumbled to his staff, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge lights. 60 primitive vessels against the combined might of the galaxy's greatest military powers. They should have surrendered the moment they detected our approach. His intelligence officer, a crystalline being whose faceted form reflected light in hypnotic patterns, pulsed with what passed for agreement among its kind. "War Chief, their vessels appear to be newly constructed. Our analysis suggests they lack the combat experience to pose a significant threat." Krextall's forearms spread in a gesture of dismissal. "Then let us end this quickly. All ships open fire. Show these mammals what happens when they defy the natural order." The coalition opened fire first, and space erupted into a light show. That would have been beautiful if it weren't so deadly. Energy beams in every color of the spectrum lanced across the void, the pure white devastation of hegemony plasma cannons, the swirling rainbow death of collective energy weapons, the absolute darkness of void swimmer nolances that seemed to eat light itself. But as their beams struck human shields, something unprecedented happened. The defensive barriers didn't just absorb the energy, they captured it, channeled it, and fed it back into the human ship's power systems. Impossible, breathed Krextall, as his sensors registered what was happening. Their shields are actually growing stronger under our assault. Chief Engineer Lim Se-young's voice crackled over the engine's internal communications from deep in the ship's engine room. The 50-year-old woman had spent her entire career pushing the boundaries of human technology. But even she sounded amazed by what she was witnessing. Adaptive defense matrices online, Admiral. Their weapons are actually charging our systems. Power levels are at 150% and climbing. What followed was a masterclass in human tactical doctrine, a demonstration of everything that made humanity unique in the galaxy. While other species had evolved along predictable paths, the hegemony perfecting overwhelming force, the collective mastering energy manipulation, the void swimmers becoming living weapons, humanity had developed something far more dangerous: adaptability. The alien fleets had never faced an enemy that could turn their own weapons against them, that could adapt in real time to changing battlefield conditions. Human ships that should have been vaporized by the opening salvo not only survived but began to transform. Their experimental regenerative armor healing battle damage faster than it could be inflicted. The first coalition ship to die was a collective energy cruiser whose captain made the mistake of focusing all his firepower on the human destroyer Guanggu. Instead of being destroyed, the smaller vessel absorbed the energy assault and fired it back through dimensional rifts that opened directly inside the alien ship's hull. The cruiser imploded in a cascade of its own redirected power. "What sorcery is this?" demanded the collective battle coordinator, its energy form flickering with distress patterns. "Our weapons cannot harm them." The answer came from the human fleet itself. Ship after ship began demonstrating capabilities that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about physics and warfare. The cruiser Daegu split into 7 independent units, each one carrying its own weapons and defenses. The destroyer Ulsan began firing through dimensional rifts, its weapons appearing inside enemy vessels without warning. The battleship Busan, named for humanity's martyred colony, deployed shields that existed in multiple layers of space-time, making it impossible to target with conventional weapons. Supreme War Chief Krextall watched his overwhelming numerical advantage evaporate like smoke. His flagship, the pride of the hegemony fleet, found its weapons useless against human defensive technology that seemed to mock the very concept of conventional warfare. "What are these creatures?" he roared as another of his destroyers vanished. In a burst of twisted space-time, consumed by weapons that his sensors couldn't even properly detect, the answer came in the form of a precision strike that crippled his command. Vessel without, destroying at a surgical application of force that left his ship dead in space but his crew alive to witness what came next. The human fleet's communications array broadcasted a message that would be remembered for millennia. "We're the species that learned to wage war against extinction itself," came the voice of Admiral Bay.com, and implacable as gravity. "We fought ice ages that turned our world into a frozen hell. We survived plagues that killed hundreds of millions. We defeated our own artificial children when they tried to replace us. Did you really think your weapons would frighten us?" The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first 30 minutes. Human vessels moved through space like living things, adapting to every tactic the coalition deployed, turning every advantage into a weakness. When alien ships tried to ram human vessels, the human armor absorbed the impact and used it to power their own weapons. When energy weapons failed, kinetic bombardments were redirected by gravity fields that turned projectiles back on their sources. When the battle ended, the tactical display told a story that would reshape galactic politics forever. 147 coalition ships had been destroyed or crippled, their hulks drifting in space like monuments to overconfidence. The human fleet had lost 12 vessels in those only because their crews had deliberately rammed enemy dreadnoughts to save damaged Allied ships, but the true shock came in the aftermath. Alien survivors, rescued from the wreckage of their vessels, spoke of human fighters who had continued battling even when their ships were breaking apart around them. Emergency transmissions intercepted during the battle revealed crews who sang as they died, pilots who laughed as they dove their fighters into enemy engines, Marines who fought with broken bones and failing life support until their hearts stopped, beating every human casualty, every pilot, every crew member. Every Marine had fought with a ferocity that unnerved even veteran alien warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. Didn't retreat, didn't surrender, didn't show any of the self-preservation instincts that every other species considered natural. The intercepted communications revealed the disturbing truth that would haunt alien nightmares for generations to come. Humans didn't just see this as a battle for territory or resources or even political dominance. They saw it as a fight for survival. And there was nothing in the galaxy more dangerous than a human who believed their species was threatened in the wreckage-strewn aftermath of the Kepler line. As rescue ships pulled survivors from the void and damage reports flooded in, one thing became clear to every intelligence agency in the galaxy: they had awakened something that should have been left to sleep. The humans weren't just angry anymore. They were at war, and they were very, very good at it. The Collective Archive Station hung in space like a dying star, its crystalline structures fractured and bleeding energy into the void. What had once been a repository of knowledge spanning millions of years now drifted as wreckage. Another casualty of humanity's relentless advance through the Theta Sector. Intelligence. Officer Kung Do-yoon floated through the station's collapsed central chamber, her environmental suit's lights cutting through the darkness as she searched for salvageable data cores. At 32, she was one of the youngest officers ever assigned to the Deep Intelligence Division. But her talent for cracking alien encryption had made her invaluable. During humanity's rapid expansion across former coalition territory, the chamber itself was a marvel of alien architecture, even in its ruined state. Walls of living crystal that had once pulsed with stored memories now lay shattered like broken dreams. Data streams that had flowed like rivers of light for millennia had gone dark, their secrets seemingly lost forever. But Kang Do-yoon knew better. Data, like energy, could never truly be destroyed, only transformed. And somewhere in this technological graveyard lay the answers to questions that had haunted human intelligence for months. Her scanner detected a faint energy signature from what had once been the station's core processing unit. The massive crystalline matrix is the size of a city block, split down the middle during the battle, but its quantum storage layers remained partially intact. "Jackpot," she whispered, connecting her portable extraction unit to the damaged core. The device, a marvel of human reverse engineering that combined captured alien technology with humanity's unique approach to data analysis, began its delicate work of reconstructing damaged files. Hours passed as Kang Do-yoon worked, her translation algorithms running through thousands of encrypted records. Most were routine shipping, manifests, scientific observations, philosophical debates between collective minds that had existed for millennia. But buried deep in the archive's most secure layers, she found something that made her blood freeze. Files marked with security. Classifications that didn't exist in any known collective database. Records sealed behind encryption, so complex that her systems needed 6 hours just to begin penetrating the outer layers. And when she finally broke through, what she found changed everything humanity thought it knew about first contact. Admiral's song she transmitted on the priority channel, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and horror that she couldn't quite suppress. "You need to see this immediately. The collective has been studying us for over 2 centuries. Response came within minutes. Direct quantum link to Admiral Song's flagship that bypassed all normal communication protocols. The old warrior's weathered face appeared on her screen. His eyes sharp despite having been awake for 36 straight hours coordinating the sector-wide offensive. "What have you found, Officer Kong, sir?" It's everything. About us before we even achieved faster-than-light travel. They've been watching, studying, cataloging everything about human civilization since before we made first contact with anyone. The data began flowing across Admiral Song's screen's anatomical charts, showing human physiology in detail that surpassed their own medical knowledge. Psychological profiles that laid bare the deepest aspects of human nature, tactical assessments, That analyzed human military capabilities with terrifying precision, but it was the final report, stamped with authentication codes from the collective's highest council, that made Admiral Song's blood run cold. The document appeared on his screen in the stark, clinical language that the energy beings used for their most serious communications. Asterisk, species analysis. Designation human threat assessment. Critical asterisk, physical adaptability exceeds all known parameters. Subjects demonstrate unprecedented capacity for environmental adaptation, technological integration, and combat effectiveness under extreme stress conditions. Cellular regeneration rates suggest species has evolved specifically for survival in hostile environments. Asterisk, psychological profile indicates capacity for sustained warfare far beyond galactic norms. Unlike other apex species, humans demonstrate no instinctual submission responses when faced with superior force. Combat effectiveness actually increases under pressure, suggesting evolutionary adaptation to permanent warfare states. Asterisk, strategic. Recommendation: avoid direct confrontation at all costs. This species has systematically eliminated every apex predator on their homeworld through coordinated hunting strategies. Survival record includes multiple planetary extinction events, global warfare lasting centuries, and successful resistance against their own artificial intelligences. Asterisk, critical note. They do not fear death. Extensive observation suggests they have made death fear them. Asterisk. Final assessment, if provoked to full military response. Probability of collective survival approaches 0. Asterisk, the report was dated 50 years before humanity's first official contact with galactic civilization. Admiral Song stared at the screen for long moments, his mind struggling to process the implications. They knew, he said finally. They knew exactly what we were, and they still chose to attack us. Dr. Jin Haiwan, the Terran Federation's chief psychologist, studied the alien assessments from her position aboard the research vessel New Saljong. The 45-year-old scientist had spent her career analyzing the psychological differences between humans and alien species, but nothing had prepared her for this level of detailed observation. It's not just that they knew, she said during the emergency conference call that connected military and civilian leadership across human space. They were terrified of us. Look at these psychological profiles. They understood human behavior better than we understand it ourselves. More files emerged from the damaged archive as Kong Dalin's extraction programs worked deeper into the collective's memory banks. What she found next sent shock waves through every intelligence agency in human space, hidden in the deepest layers of collective memory. Protected by security measures that suggested they were never meant to be accessed again, were records of other species, dozens of them. Civilizations that had risen to prominence across the galaxy over millions of years. Each one eventually coming into contact with a species the collective classified under various names: the Wanderers, the Adapters, the Survivors. Each entry followed an eerily similar pattern. Initial contact with a bipedal species from the galactic rim. Periods of peaceful coexistence lasting anywhere from decades to centuries. Growing tensions as the newcomers expanded too rapidly, asked too many questions, refused to accept limitations that other species considered natural, and then ... silence. The extinct civilizations, Dr. Jin realized as she reviewed the records, her voice barely above a whisper. The makers who built the ring worlds in the Andromeda approach. The builders whose megastructures still orbit dead stars in the Magellanic sectors. The natural disasters that supposedly wiped out entire star systems. She looked up at the faces watching her through the quantum link, seeing her own horror reflected in their expressions. It wasn't cosmic phenomena, wasn't stellar collapse, or gamma-ray bursts, or any of the explanations in the galactic historical records. The truth hung in the silence like a blade waiting to fall. It was humans. Earlier waves of human expansion that had been forgotten, buried, erased from galactic memory, because the survivors couldn't bear to remember what happened when they pushed us too far. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't stumbled onto the galactic stage as confused newcomers. They were returning conquerors. Species killers whose reputation had been so terrifying that entire civilizations had conspired to forget they had ever existed. On the bridge of the Inchin, Admiral Bay received a priority transmission that would change the course of the war. President Cho's image appeared on his screen, but something fundamental had changed in her expression. The diplomatic mask she had worn during years of negotiation was gone, replaced by something ancient and implacable that seemed to look out from humanity's primordial past. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying the weight of species memory awakening, "after millennia of sleep, you are hereby authorized to implement Protocol 7. Admiral Bay felt the blood drain from his face. Protocol 7 was the option that had never been used, never even fully tested. It existed in the deepest classified files of the Terran military. A theoretical response to threats so severe that conventional warfare would be insufficient. "Madam President, are you certain? Once we activate Protocol 7, there's no going back. The Galactic community made their choice when they murdered 200,000 civilians at New Busan." President Cho interrupted, her enhanced eyes reflecting depths of fury that seemed to burn with their own light. "They had their chance for peace. They chose to make us angry." The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Bay staring at authorization codes that would transform the human fleet from a defensive force into something the galaxy had spent millions of years trying to forget. Humanity unleashed, unrestrained, and utterly without mercy, as he input the codes that would awaken humanity's true nature. Admiral Bay couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to discover why every advanced civilization in galactic history had one common piece of advice, buried so deep in their archives that most had forgotten it existed: never make the humans angry. Ever the galaxy was about to remember. Why? The end came not with the thunder of massive battles or the flash of super weapons, but with something far more chilling: silence. One by one, across the galaxy, alien civilizations simply stopped fighting. Not because they couldn't continue, but because they had finally understood what they were truly facing. The Terran fleet moved through space like a force of nature. It's no longer bound by the cautious doctrines of defensive warfare. Protocol 7 had unleashed something that the galaxy's survivors would spend centuries trying to understand. These weren't just warships anymore. They were inevitability given form, carrying the concentrated fury of a species that had been pushed beyond its breaking point. Supreme War Chief Krextall stood in what remained of his throne room. The crystalline palace that had been the seat of hegemony power for 3 millennia, now reduced to glittering rubble. His forearms, each one capable of crushing steel, hung limp at his sides like the limbs of a broken marionette. Through the shattered crystal walls, he could see human ships in orbit around his homeworld's leak. Predatory forms that cast shadows over cities that had stood for 1,000,000 years. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had commanded fleets that conquered. Star Systems had personally led the assault that reduced New Busan to ash and bone. Now, his own world burned under the same merciless efficiency, its billion-year-old monuments toppling like children's toys before humanity's wrath. The human who entered his ruined court was not what he expected. Commander Ominesio was small, by galactic standards barely reaching his chest, even with his massive frame bent in defeat. She wore the simple black uniform of the Terran occupation forces, with none of the ornate decorations that alien military leaders favored. But it was her eyes that made Krextall's blood-run cold eyes that held the weight of decisions that had reshaped the galaxy, had watched civilizations kneel and empires crumble. "Your surrender is accepted," she said simply, her voice carrying no emotion, no triumph, no satisfaction. It was the tone of someone conducting routine business, as if accepting the capitulation of species that had ruled for eons. It was just another item on her daily schedule. Krextall's mandibles clicked in what his species used to express bitter amusement. "And my people? The billions who trusted me to protect them? Your people will be relocated to designated preservation worlds?" Menesio replied, consulting a tablet that contained the fate of entire civilizations. "The transition will begin immediately." Preservation. Krextall's voice cracked, the sound echoing through his broken palace like the death rattle of empires. "You mean like animals in a zoo?" Oh, Menesio looked up from her tablet, and for a moment something almost resembling sympathy flickered in those terrible eyes. Like children who need protection from themselves, she corrected. You chose to make this war total when you burned our civilians alive. Now you live with the consequences. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out with mechanical precision. The collective's energy beings, who had considered themselves beyond physical harm, found themselves contained in specially designed prisons that fed off their life force gauges of crystallized thought that turned their own consciousness against them. The hive minds, whose psychic networks had spanned multiple star systems, discovered that humans had developed weapons that could sever their mental links permanently, leaving their queens isolated and mad with the silence. Species that had ruled 4 geological ages found themselves reduced to client states under human protection. Their fleets disbanded, their weapons destroyed, their populations relocated to worlds chosen by human administrators who studied them like fascinating specimens. The Void Swimmers, beings of living darkness who had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years, were contained in fields of artificial light so intense that they couldn't maintain physical form. The crystalline hierarchies, whose technological mastery had been unquestioned for eons, watched as human engineers reverse-engineered their greatest achievements in a matter of days in the rebuilt Galactic Council chamber, now located on Luna, where Earth's gravity well ensured that no delegate could forget who truly held power. Ambassador Park Min-ho stood before the same assembly that had dismissed humanity's warnings just 2 years earlier. Most of the original delegates were gone, of course. Some had died in the fighting, others had been removed when their species fell, and a few had simply vanished into the chaos of galactic collapse. The chamber itself had been redesigned according to human aesthetics: clean lines, efficient lighting, and holographic displays that showed the current state of human expansion across former alien territories. Where once crystalline spires had reached toward artificial stars, now simple columns of polished metal supported a dome that showed the real sky above Luna's surface. "You were warned," Park Min-ho said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority. That had marked his first appearance before this assembly. His uniform was unchanged still, the simple blue and white of the Terran Federation, but everything else had been transformed. "We told you we preferred peace. We explained what would happen if you forced us to fight." The chamber was silent, except for the soft hum of environmental systems maintaining atmosphere for the handful of surviving alien delegates. Those who remained looked upon humans with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, like children who had awakened something terrible, and now prayed it might show mercy. "Now you know why we were the only species that never asked the galaxy for permission to exist," he continued, his eyes sweeping across beings who had once commanded fleets and ruled empires. "We didn't need permission. We never did." Sora, now serving as Director of Interspecies Relations, stepped forward from the human delegation. Her role had evolved from xenobiologist to something approaching a planetary administrator, responsible for managing the integration of dozens of alien species into humanity's expanding sphere of influence. "The human hegemony will provide protection, guidance, and resources to all member species," she announced, her words carrying the weight of official policy that would reshape galactic civilization. "In return, you will abide by our laws, accept our authority, and contribute to the collective security of human space." Collective Remnant, one of the few energy beings to survive the systematic dismantling of their civilization, pulsed weakly from its containment field. "And if we refuse..." Park Min-ho's smile was gentle, almost paternal, but his words carried the weight of worlds reduced to ash, and the screams of civilizations that had learned too late what it meant to make humanity angry. "Then you'll discover why every species that ever opposed us is now extinct." The vote was unanimous. It always was, these days. Later, in the quiet of his private office, overlooking Earth's blue marble, Park Min-ho gazed out at the stars and wondered if there had been another way. The view was peaceful, serene, giving no hint of the predators that his homeworld had spawned and sent forth to claim the galaxy. His aide, Lieutenant Kim Young-ho, approached with the daily reports that detailed the administration of an empire, spanning thousands of worlds. "Sir, the Outer Rim integration is proceeding ahead of schedule. The last of the resistance cells surrendered this morning. Good Minho replied, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had watched the galaxy burn and been forced to rebuild it in humanity's image. And the memorial for New Busan? Construction begins next week. It will be visible from orbit, a monument that every ship passing through the system will see and remember. Minho nodded slowly. 200,000 dead colonists, their sacrifice now honored by a galaxy that finally understood the price of awakening humanity's wrath. The memorial would serve as both tribute and warning, a reminder of what had started this war and why it had ended the way it did. Any regrets, sir? Lieutenant Kim asked quietly. The question that had haunted human leadership since the first alien world had fallen. Park Min-ho was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars that now belonged to a species. Somewhere out there, human administrators were cataloging alien populations, human engineers were studying captured technologies, and human colonists were settling worlds that had been inhabited for millions of years. Only that it took them so long to listen, he said finally. The galaxy had learned too late that there are some warnings you ignore at your own peril. In the depths of space, on worlds that had never known human footsteps, new species emerging from primitive civilizations looked up at the stars and whispered the prayer that had become universal across known space. Asterisk, please. Let us never make them angry. Asterisk, the humans had kept their word after all. They had warned the galaxy what would happen if they were pushed too far. They had offered peace, cooperation, and mutual prosperity. But when that offer was rejected, when their children were murdered and their colonies burned, they had shown the galaxy exactly what they were capable of. They were the species that had made death itself fear them. And now, finally, the galaxy understood why they had never asked for permission to exist among the stars. They had never needed it. The end.